Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss another wall of reality that Brexit seems to be trying to run towards as the Tories continue to try and have their illicit cake and eat it, believe in their own rhetoric that they can do as they please without any consequences. Basically, the Brexiteers may be able to find next year a few operational problems with their Freeport and Northern Ireland protocol plans. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So two strands to this really, yeah. So Freeports and Northern Ireland Protocol, both things that Brexiteers desperately want to scrap in the case of the protocol and to impose in the form of their investment zones, which sort of go against what everyone else around us will want. So, you know, Brexit was many things to many people. It would, to a core of the Eurosceptic Conservative Party, their objections to the EU was their fervour for higher standards, you know, higher standards of goods, higher standards for worker and consumer rights, higher standards of environmental protection, health and safety, that sort of thing. You know, what's wrong with rich factory owners slaving their workers to death to produce crap that can be sold to the surviving peasants for a few pence? Brexit for them was about escaping that regulatory orbit of the EU. And this is why you see and hear so many pro-Brexit commentators right now gnashing their teeth going, it's not Brexit that's the problem. They haven't done the thing right. You know, they're complaining that the government are dragging their feet on all this deregulation that Brexit was supposed to bring. They actually think they'd get away with it, get away with taking away all our rights, our standards, our freedoms. And yeah, they have gotten away with quite a lot. But when they take away something that tens of millions all notice at once, they may get a rude awakening. You know, the way the Tories usually operate is they take away our standard of living a little bit at a time. They come into power, they initially blame it on Labour. That's standard, they blame it on Labour. And a little bit at a time, they'll just take it away. So that by the time they can't blame it on Labour anymore, people haven't really noticed what they've lost. The classic case of the frog in the boiling pot method. But of late, Tory Brexiteers have been trying to push the process, rush it, because they sort of see a timer. They think they're probably not going to be in power in a couple of years. You know, and we saw the impact of rushing it with the mini budget blew up in their face. We may see the impact with the Tories' investment zones idea, for example. You know, they're intended to create what some call free ports around the UK, where the normal standards and rules don't really apply as a way of passing through various loopholes to avoid trading realities. But the thing is, the EU have seen this sort of thing coming a mile away. Our trade and cooperation agreement has clauses which require the UK to avoid significant attempts to boost unfair competition with the EU. And unlike the usual commitments that you might find in a trade agreement, and do find in trade agreements, there's none of this arbitration nonsense if the UK reneges on this commitment. If the UK plays silly buggers, the EU can just apply corrective measures unilaterally. All perfectly legal, doesn't need to go to a court, all within the scope of the agreement. We signed up to it. This could include applying tariffs or extra tariffs on goods produced using what would be considered unfair levels of state aid in the form of tax breaks, for example. Now, that's not to say that as soon as these investment zones start exporting goods to the EU, that these corrective measures would suddenly swing into action. There is a certain level of behaviour which is considered sort of standard around the world with free ports. In fact, it's worth remembering there are free ports in the EU right now. And the reason the UK doesn't currently have any is because David Cameron scrapped them as being a waste of money, which they are. Nothing to do with the EU, because we had them in the EU. And if the UK pursues a strategy of bringing them back in a way that doesn't fall foul of our trade agreements, then the Office of Budgetary Responsibilities calculated that they'll just come at a cost to the Treasury with negligible benefit to the economy. And the reason I bring this up again is because there's a little bit of a fuss being made of the fact that EU are going to raise the issue of the UK's plans for free ports at the next joint committee meeting. And an academic group has also released a paper a little while ago detailing the issues which they think could potentially fall foul of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. But from what I can see of reports, all that's really going to happen is the EU will raise the issue with the UK essentially as a way of making sure everyone understands the situation. That's why you have these committee meetings. It's not in anyone's interest for the EU to sit back, wait for the UK to breach the agreement, then take the corrective action, which will inevitably create a political storm here in Britain. Much better to make sure that ministers and officials on both sides understand each other in terms of intentions and consequences. This is the sort of thing. This is actually what we've lost since Brexit as well, since we left the EU. Because we used to understand each other much better because we had officials and we had politicians in the EU, in the Parliament, for example, and the Commission, talking to each other. So everyone sort of understood where everyone was. We've sort of lost that a bit. We have these joint committee meetings now. But beyond that, we've sort of lost that dialogue. Because nobody seriously believes that these investment zones, free ports, whatever else you want to call them, are going to give the UK a competitive edge in the post-Brexit world. It's not going to do anything for our economy. It's not going to do anything for our people. It's likely to have two real motivations behind them. First, it's a thing that Tories can point to and say, Brexit, that's it. It doesn't matter if it does anything useful or if it does anything at all. They'll tell people that it's marvellous. Oh, this thing's marvellous. Okay, what benefits have we got from it? Oh, loads of benefits. All right. And you're going to get even more in 20 years' time. All right, then. And then they'll say, and we couldn't have done this inside the EU, but the EU have got free ports. Not like this, they haven't. Like the guff they keep coming out with regarding the COVID vaccines, for example. The second potential motivation is the prospect for lots more money laundering. Free ports are known around the world as hives of criminal activity. They are literally places where the normal rules and oversight is scaled right back. Of course, they're going to attract criminals. But some of the Tories' best friends are criminals, so they want to do something nice for them. It's quite likely that the Conservative leadership is less interested in following through on the more insane ideas behind Brexit and just wants to be seen to be taking advantage of the benefits of Brexit. Like being able to toss away public money for no return. Mind you, they were able to do that in the EU as well. However, although the impression I'm getting from various business articles is there's no big sweat and the EU are just going to bring up the issue of free ports just as a way of making sure both sides understand what they're messing with in order to avoid conflict later on. Then there was an interesting report in the Irish Times, which I thought was related to this, but it's actually much more likely the Northern Ireland Protocol. So it talked about legislation which has been getting agreement from the EU Parliament, Commission and the Council and is intended to solidify the EU's powers to enforce all agreements with the UK via these corrective measures. So, if the UK breaches part of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement via free ports, for example, there is already a fairly established procedure within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement for taking action. What the EU want to nail down is the fact that they can also take this action if the UK breaches any agreement, including the Northern Ireland Protocol. In fact, the article was actually suggesting that the EU are really have got the protocol in mind with this and that they actually could be ready to act on it next year. In fact, the Irish MEP who led talks on the legislation is reported as suggesting that it is basically to do with the protocol more than anything else. It's basically a signal of intent. The UK is still passing the Northern Ireland Protocol bill through Parliament. As far as we know, it's going to get passed through. I suspect it won't get passed in its current form, but it's probably going to be passed in some form. This would mean ministers could unilaterally dismantle parts of the protocol that they don't like. It would still be unlawful in international law, but the purpose of the bill is to prevent British courts getting involved. An international court takes years to do its work, and in the end, it's really more about saying who's at fault. The resolution is always a bit weak, but a domestic court can demand an immediate resolution. A little bit like when the High Court in Belfast stopped Edwin Poots of the DUP from stopping all protocol checks earlier this year, just before the Stormont elections. No, you don't, mate, said the judge. What this EU legislation seems to do is set out the precise nature of reprisals. I noticed that the article mentions air carriers. Now, it's been clearly understood for a year now that the EU are prepared to dissolve parts of, if not all of, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the UK if the UK goes too far with unilateral action on the protocol. This is why just over a year ago, Johnson panicked and stopped his then Brexit Minister David Frost announcing their intention to suspend the protocol because they were about to do so. There was a hasty change of plans, which ended up with Frost resigning. But strategically speaking, so if the EU are going to impose any corrective action, what do? Well, nobody really wants to dissolve the trading agreements between the EU and the UK and prolong the acrimonious dialogue that's been flying about for too long now. So how to bring the Tories to heel quickly? Well, you need something that would be noticed by the public immediately. Because it's only the public that can put pressure on MPs, and only MPs, Tory MPs, who can put pressure on the government. So you need something that would cause such disruption to the economy on such a scale that the government would be forced to U-turn immediately. Ideally, what you would want is for the government to recognise this and never go down the path where they need to U-turn. You know, like you think in terms of the French decision 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, to restrict access across their border for lorry drivers without a negative COVID test, given that we were in the process of preparing a Christmas gift of a new variant to the world. The public backlash was fairly robust. There was no blaming the French for that one. Well, preventing any UK registered aircraft from flying into EU space, that would be quite devastating. Be impossible for the mainstream media to ignore the issue, and they would have to explain why it was happening. Yes, the likes of the Express would say it was the EU being spiteful, but it wouldn't stop the immediate damage to the economy, the likes of which would bring Sunak down quicker than Truss's mini budget brought her down. If he didn't correct it quickly, that is. Basically, just like the cake, this idea of Brexit freedoms, as defined by the Tories, is a lie. It doesn't exist. Yes, a country can indeed do its own thing. Of course it can. But if it wants any interactions with other countries, there needs to be give and take. If we want to export to the EU, we follow their rules. They used to be our rules. We used to play a major part in agreeing them. Rules barely got passed if we didn't agree with them. Not anymore. We don't even need to be consulted now, and we certainly don't get a vote. You know, but, I mean, we can choose not to export anything to the EU. Absolutely, we can choose not to export anywhere. We can go back to the Stone Age. Although we probably won't last very long there, because as soon as we're back in the Stone Age, I'm sure some country or other will think, oh, do you know what? Do you know what's really easy? Invading a Stone Age country with modern warfare. But, you know, Brexit didn't stop us being rule takers. It made us rule takers. And next year could be a very hard year for Brexit. Sunak's going to run out of road on a few issues at some point. You know, there's not just the Northern Ireland Protocol bill, but the matter of the EU legacy rules. There's a bill flying through Parliament to get rid of those as well. Hardline Brexiteers want it all scrapped. Protocol, EU rules, everything. The reaction, if we did so, would be severe. So Sunak now has to try and work out a path that involves doing nothing at all, but making it look like he's about to do what everyone wants all at once, any moment now. Because if he does what his hardcore Brexiteers want him to do, the international repercussions and the impact on the economy will be devastating. Liz Truss will look like a walk in the park. If he doesn't, and these bills pass, or he allows them to not pass, or he allows them to pass with major amendments, but otherwise doesn't use them, then what? Then his Brexiteers could bring him down. So yeah, he needs to steer a course that involves not doing anything, but making everyone think he's going to do what they want. A tough ask for the canniest of political operators, and Sunak is very far from that. But anyway, there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.